where does the responsibility lie for helping those choices be made effectively? And how do you just go about doing that? Because there's so many different ways you can get things done, and they have their own merits and they fit well into particular areas. And maybe as a buying manager, it can be quite difficult to spot that. So where do people go to, and how do they get the best results out of that?
It sits with procurement. Yeah, it's an interesting one. So just to clarify, Johnny, my background is very much in the services side rather than goods. I studied goods during my SIPs, of course, but from a services perspective, and more importantly on the talent services side, there are many ways to buy the same thing ultimately, and I think that's probably true for most people that listen and are involved in the same area that you and I are. If we look at talent, there's contingent workforce, contractors, temporary workers, staff augmentation type services. There's statement of work or release order driven purchases around managed services, squads, project teams, single resources. And then if you're really aligning as a business, whether you in procurement or members of HR and talent specific teams manage your staff and your FTC kind of recruitment processes, if you're really going to get clear and channel where someone should go to purchase the services correctly, then for me, all of those need to be aligned. And that's what we're working on right now, is an ongoing series of processes to make key decisions and make the process easy for our people, which are aligned to these policies and strategy and ambitions, which are really clearly communicated to us all, but also driven by data as well.
And how is that brought together? Because that's a lot of different facets
and through lots of projects.
How is that brought together? I mean, we've talked before about triage. I think that's a fascinating area. I mean, what is that the way to bring it all together?
It's so exciting what my colleagues do in triage. Me to a lesser extent, I ride on the coattails of some great people, but the triage desk is fascinating. So if I stick with my particular category that I'm in right now, business consulting, that without applying some quite restrictive controls, there are often ways of purchasing the same thing or group or person. There's more than one way of doing it. You can say, okay, I've looked at all of the guidance around whether it's a worker versus services. I've read the guidance on most companies' kind of stance and feedback to the business in the lead up to the intermediaries legislation coming into place last April. There's still grey area for me. I'm not really supervising and controlling them day to day, but I have got a release order rather than a contract, and I don't approve timesheets. They're here kind of working off their own steam. And then you drill into a bit further and you go to the next level of questions around whether substitution clauses are allowed. I'm just springing some out of the air, hypothetically, or maybe a project gets cancelled. I'd like to move them onto another piece of work. Or if they don't deliver that milestone, do they come back and deliver it for free until they have, or do I actually pay them for the time work like I do the staff in my team? And I think most people I speak to about that are agreed that I wouldn't say it could be manipulated, but it can be looked at in different ways based on who the requester is. So what we've looked to do is try and get a triage desk type solution, which in the easiest sense of the word is it develops a critical kind of single point of entry into the I have a need conversation. That comes into procurement, and then through a series of questions, we can help kind of the individual demystify and decipher what channel they should be going so that we can try and ensure that optimal buying channels are used at any one time. And obviously that the reporting that goes all the way through to our CFO is accurate. So there's no rocket science questions to this. It's ones that all companies ask. Is it a person? Is it a person with deliverables? Is it a service with deliverables? Is it a consulting service? Am I looking for skills only or a person only? But the plan is that we can go through a series of questions, and the individual who is basing a lot of what they do otherwise on what they can see on internet and the intranet, and what they did historically at their previous employer, or what they did last time they had a purchase. What we're trying to do is help take that headache away from what's the optimal buying channel, but where do I go next?
Yeah, because I mean, there's certain ways that can be kind of systemized. You know, they're going to be standard Q&A. You could take people through a kind of decision tree process, a bit like effectively like the way the CES tool works, for example. CES tool, yeah. Yes, no's, pushing you in the right direction. There's quite a lot that feeds into that, from a legal perspective, tax, financial perspective, but also from a right fit requirement to engagement type, or requirement to methodology, because there are all these different channels and they operate in different ways. And like you said, you might be looking for an output or an outcome, or you might be just looking for some people to do some work. But I guess it gets tricky when it's a question of how do you dig deeper into the strategy behind, or the understanding behind the people that are answering these questions. And I guess that's where there's a real people element to it as well. If it's a critical purchase, or if somebody wants to talk to somebody and wants to dive into more detail, then you can have a really great in-depth conversation with them. But you mentioned goods versus services. Guided buying in goods is far simpler. The supply chain is far more complex, but guided buying for things is much simpler than services, which are this kind of intangible thing that you have to try and somehow tie down.
I think we talked before about red widgets.
Yeah, I love a red widget.
So
love a red widget.
I wouldn't possibly say anything other than it carries its own complexities. But I think what I like about the services procurement that I'm involved in is just how unpredictable a commodity we all are. We do weird things, and it makes things interesting. Yeah.